Welcome, everybody. Today we are talking about belonging in the time of mass layoffs, if you will. With me today is Ericka Jones, former colleague of mine from my Cargill days. She's gone on to do other things since then and has kindly agreed to come on my podcast today. Ericka, welcome.
Hi, I'm so glad that we're back together on a video call.
Getting the band back together. I love it.
Getting the band back together. I love it.
Yes. Well, so for those of the audience who don't know you, I always start with you telling a little bit about your career story. So tell us a little bit about your career adventure.
Yeah. There's so many different chapters in my career. I've been working professionally for a couple of decades. And I would say that my career is not linear. It's definitely, the chapters have been written based on saying yes and just being open to whatever, what is presented next. And I would say that that's not like I let it steer me, but I think that, I've always been a yes and open to where that led, which has led to a really dynamic book. I started my career off in retail, working in leadership on the store side. So really focused on customer facing and leading management teams. Then that led me into talent acquisition, which I would have never thought. And leading a team of recruiters in the US and recruiting and hiring for early career talent and opening up a couple of international stores for the retailer that I was working for at the time. And in addition to that, what I really loved about talent acquisition, especially for early careers, is that, at the time, no one wants to take their career and work in a mall. Right. So really what it was is that's where I really learned about connection and human-centered connection. When you're really working with early career talent perspectives and they're making choices on their career and you are getting them to work in your organization, they're coming because of you and because of who you are and what in your way of being and how you're able to be delivered versus I'm going to go work in a mall, right? Like that's not like a sexy appeal after you're finishing college or whatever pathway that is.
Yeah.
And so leading that and leading partnerships and building out a career, a talent acquisition team from the ground up, we were using Excel documents. There was nothing sophisticated about the programs that we were using. So being able to learn and build and scale that segment of the organization was really wonderful. And what I learned in that is that I loved building solution-focused programs and scaling them.
Nice.
And that's my sweet spot. And so, any leader that I've worked with, they're like, you're excellent with Tingletown, able to identify the problem, have a white, page, and then build a program and a strategy with that. So that led me into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, where I led at the same organization, our DEI program for our stores organization, that side of the house, and developed programs to scale that globally. And then that really, the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion is really where I found my sweet spot when you're talking about culture, behaviors, a sense of belonging, and behind every great organization are people. And it's because people feel seen and valued where they want to put their best work forward. And that's how you're able to increase productivity, enhance business, because you're also the employees are reflective of the customers, right? And so that intersectionality of tapping into the behavior aspect and leveraging differences for employees really was like a light bulb for me in my career and how we can correlate that and translate that into business outcomes. So I've been in the DEI space, specialized in it for over 17 years. And I've worked at various, I would say it's always been there for me, ever since in high school when there wasn't language around it. And so I've always been in the work of how do we make people feel included and belong, like that sense of belonging. Um, and so, yeah, I've worked at some notable organizations throughout the time. One of the stints where you and I came into contact as well and worked on a learning and development program where we were
Mhm.
embedding inclusive behaviors into leadership development programs.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then in just like my last role at an in the automotive industry, I was also in the public sector. So I've been in a lot of different sectors, and this work is translates within any industry. Everyone's trying to find the solutions for the same problem with
Yeah.
talent, if there is a problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a little bit. And
Nice.
then I teach yoga and meditation. So a lot of mindfulness and holistic approach of leadership when it comes to well-being
Yeah.
really is the foundation and bedrock as who I
Are
am as a
are your photos still up in a will be unnamed, very popular yoga clothing store?
they're not. They're
Okay.
not. So my
That had
contract
its
with that.
season. Okay.
Yeah. The contract with that ended. You're
Makes sense.
talking. So I was an ambassador with Lululemon, a yoga ambassador,
Yeah.
and here in the Twin Cities, and that ended. So,
Okay.
really, as well, when you think of again the intersectionality of that, of the heart of
Well-being.
and, and well-being and community and connection, and people want to feel like they're a part of something and they want to be a part of something that matters, right? And make it an impact. And that is ultimately leadership in an
Yeah.
organization as well.
Nice. I want to come back to, one thing you were saying about working in the malls and, how do you make, working in a retail environment for, probably like a younger generation of employees, right? Like probably just over, or not too far over the age restrictions for working, right? And making it a place that people want to be. I've had some similar experience when I worked in the restaurant industry, which is retail and hospitality are very closely resemble one another in certain ways. And I remember the data coming through that, and very clear data on stores that had higher engagement had higher sales, right? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously higher retention. And, that nothing in that environment sort of makes or breaks the, not just the store's performance, but the employee experience, right? The way that managers do, right? And I think there's this whole thing where, and I remember this being one of my first jobs was working in a restaurant as a host. And so I would be there just before servers would be kind of like checking in and turning over for the day. And the very first question I would get asked standing at the front of the store was, who's like A, which managers are on tonight? B, who's closing, right? Because everybody wanted to know if they were stuck with the good or the bad managers,
Mm-hmm.
for the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the power. It's so clear at those frontline, retail jobs, like the power that managers hold, especially when you can walk out the door and go to another store or another restaurant if you don't like the one you're in, right?
Yeah, I mean, Gallup and Deloitte, they've done a lot of studies on employee engagement, right? Where those who are highly engaged have less absenteeism. When you think
Mhm.
about, a retailer or the hospitality industry and you're working with non-exempt employees, like people calling out, not showing up.
Yeah.
Also safety, when you think about safety incidents, reducing in turnover, and also like productivity and profitability, and customers really feel that, and so they, and then also when we think about like in retail, uh, uh, like shrink and like theft rates, that
Mhm.
happen. So overall, when employees are engaged, they know that they make an impact to the organization that really contributes to the value, the culture, the mission, and they're willing to put their best work forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And while engagement surveys measure all kinds of things, one key place that they measure is inclusion and belonging. Like, do I feel like I belong here? And so this is my very practiced segue into our topic for today. Right. So we're in this odd time. We're recording in mid-November 2025 right now. And I know this year alone, just with recognizable brands, right? Brands that are big enough, with numbers big enough to remark upon, there's been at least a couple 100,000 layoffs since June, I want to say. And it's a rough time for people. It's a rough time for, obviously, first and foremost, people who've been laid off. It's a rough time for those who weren't, but were present for layoffs, right? At a company that had layoffs, those who were left behind or left, still made it through, right? The layoffs, right? And even in some cases where I've heard, right, there's companies who have really declared we are in an ongoing review of our business model. And so there's sort of this looming, there could be more to come, right? And so, I think one of the things we wanted to talk about today was the sense of like how this period of time at companies that are facing these kinds of layoffs, how that can sort of rock the foundation of belonging in an organization. So I'd love to hear, some of your
what I think that, if I had to umbrella it all, I would say it's uncertainty, right? Because we've experienced it even since COVID. There's been these different levels of uncertainty. And I think layoffs, we've seen it a lot this year, and how it's done, right? I've heard stories and how it's done. It's a robot call. People are all brought on, and there feels like there's like this lack of humanization. And really great leaders, I think, in times of uncertainty, especially during layoffs, is it's important to really double down on the element of belonging. Because number one, for the employee that was laid off, unfortunately, they want to know that they mattered. They want to know that their work that they did mattered. They want to know, like, have that reinforcement, because it could potentially chip away confidence that you're now bringing into another organization, right? So it's kind of like passing the buck. Like, you want to leave them in a state of wholeness, so that when they're going to the next organization, if I'm a firm believer, if one door closes, there's another one that's opening. So your other chapter is getting ready to get written. I don't think it's always a bad thing. Most people that I've heard that have laid off are like, well, if it didn't happen, I would have never left, right? So it was time for them to have done that. But so you really want them to feel valued when they leave, right? So that they can, for their contributions, and really honor that, because they're now a customer. The second part too is the employees that are left behind, like those quote unquote survivor employees, like there's probably survivor's guilt a little bit. And you want to like also show the care and the remaining of that, because there is a level of uncertainty and fear that I could be next that's there. And really, in those times of belonging, what I see in that is re-emphasizing what it means to cultivate belonging. You feel seen, and you feel heard. And being heard in that, which we talk so much about in organizations, is psychological safety. Right. And allowing people to be able to name the emotion and express the emotion and what they're feeling, right? And of fear, of guilt, of a sense of grief, uncertainty of the direction of the organization. And leaders allowing space for that. And when I've seen leaders allow space for that, I honestly have applauded their leadership more than anything, versus let's just move on. Yes, we still need to move on, but there's this moment of empathetic leadership And it's being courageous and bold to say, I'm going to allow space to name this emotion. And then how do we want to come together as a team to ensure that our well-being is that we're good, and that you feel seen, that and here is my commitment as a leader, in order to ensure that we are heading on the straight path, like, because we still do need to continue to keep moving forward, right? And so I think there's optimism in the leader. They're able to hold the capacity of the duality of both, knowing that the teams can feel this and knowing that we need to like move forward. But you have to like take them through the river to the other side, because we're working in this multi-generational organization, so if you think of like an employee who is a Gen Z, they've never experienced this before, right? So that can feel like a shock and like probably have a deeper loss than someone like you or I, where we're like, oh yeah, we've seen this, like just keep it moving, right?
Yeah.
And this really, this is hard and this is tough. And leaders during that, by building that belonging, they're able to build resiliency for their leaders on their team.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's an important, I think it's important for leaders to really think about how belonging is a through line of all things. It's not just to increase the engagement of employees, but it's also during the times of uncertainty.
Yeah. So I want to take a step back for a second. And because you've defined belonging, right? So, feeling seen, heard, valued. During the best of times, right? During an average quarter or year, maybe that's not the definition of the best of times, but during the average times, right? So I think for some people, feeling valued, seen, heard can feel like kind of an esoteric thing. So break it down. Help us break it down for leaders out there. What is their role, practically speaking, right, in helping people on their team feel valued, seen, heard?
Yeah, I think one, it's like it's really knowing, I think it's being transparent, honestly. When you think about like organizations, especially those who are for profit, and there's external headwinds, and you, depending on the market or the industry that you're in, and just being really real, I work in the DEI space. So it's been very challenging right now, and so we've seen teams where they've laid off individuals. And what I've heard are some of those leaders that have been really transparent about what the external environments are and where the company needs to go, and how your function is aligning to where the company needs to go, given like external environments, the marketplace, or whatever is happening. Then an individual is able to connect the dots, right? And they're able to see that and land it on something. But if we're not being transparent, and then there's not clarity and there's ambiguity around business and how your role aligns to the business, it's hard for what I've seen. It's hard for employees to land the plane on why something like that would happen. So I think that it's, and I'll speak and be very honest. I was recently laid off, and it was no shock or surprise. And I think that the leader that I had did like the best that they could have done with it. All the dots connected as to where the company was going, where the headwinds were. And so that made it very easy to understand. Like on the other side of that is a leader that has to do that doesn't want to. Right. And that is tough. And so I think like the number one thing is transparency from the beginning.
Right. And I think that helps drive people feeling sort of valued and respected and right
Yeah.
treated like an adult. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Because I've been in, one organization I was in had to, we went through like a summer furlough, right? It was '09, there was a downturn in the economy, and, they were just very transparent with us. They said, listen, we had two choices to make, right? We could miss payroll, shutter, a few choices, right? Miss payroll, shutter the doors, and we could all look for a new job. We could do a mass layoff, at the company and hope, we can make it through and we have enough people to do the work our clients have for us. Or, C, we've sort of made this decision that, if we can, everyone, top to bottom in the company, take an X% pay cut, we think it should be temporary for just the summer. And if we can make it to, whatever that was, that we'll be on a stronger footing and be able to get back to full pay and come out the other end even stronger. And being treated like adults sort of helped us. I would say it almost helped everybody. Now, that didn't mean it made it easy, but I think everybody felt treated well, treated like an adult, trusted. So feeling valued is not just the, I appreciate your work, which is also extremely important, right? How are you actually showing appreciation for people and that they are valued, that their contribution is valued too, right? So I think being trusted, transparent, treated like an adult, but also don't forget, and it's probably the easier one to do, but it's like, don't forget to also like take the time to show genuine appreciation for the contribution of your employees, right?
Yeah. Like you can't control the outcome, but you can control the honesty of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can control that. And I think when employees know that, to your point, I love that. You feel like you're an adult and you're being treated like adult. So that naturally creates trust. Right. And we know that high trust teams, are, like they once again, that creates higher engagement, like more belonging. And I think that that's really important for leaders to reflect on, is what is the state of belonging, and how would we measure that? And what's our role in creating that true sense of belonging when we have to make hard business decisions? As leaders, people are bringing in so many different facets and dimensions of who they are. They're bringing in, all parts of themselves and work. Long are the days, with our grandparents' generation, the boomers, the traditionalists, where it was like, you keep that separate. Yeah. Everyone's coming in, thanks to technology with all of this here. And it's easy to create stories, like for an employee to create stories. So a really keen leader will understand the temperature, and the environment of their team, and they will know how to turn that dial in order to maintain like a steady room temperature.
Yeah. And so that kind of gets to the, helping employees feel seen and heard too, right? Which is, again, I think they can take it from the conceptual, which is, especially, so let's bring it to the current environment we're in, where perhaps you're on a team, you're a leader, you're on a team where, you had to lay off, 10, 20% of your team, right? So practically in an environment like this, pretending it didn't happen and trying to move forward the next day, reallocating work and just plowing forward your next team meeting, trying to treat that exactly like you did last week's team meeting. Not only is it, to your point, like lacking in transparency, but people are going to feel probably not very seen or heard, right? Whereas, like, again, practically speaking, what should you do in your very next meeting, leader? Perhaps we call out what happened and say, right, we this is what just happened, and how's everybody doing, right? Now, I think where leaders get tripped up is feeling like they need to know how to respond to anything and everything people might say, right? And I think that's, but I I believe, and I'd be curious what your perspective is. Like, I believe that's a bit of a fallacy, like that you actually need to know what to do or say for whatever might happen after you throw that question out. Like, how is everybody doing? This is really hard. I know work's going to be piling up for people in the near term. How's everybody doing with what just happened? Right. And I'm probably going to repeat myself, but I think where some leaders freeze is the fear of what they might say and whether or not I'll have the right response to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you bring that up, because what I really think is, in the sense of, it's like the pink elephant. Could you imagine if we were driving down the street and there was a pink elephant, like in the middle of the highway? What would you do? You'd probably call your wife or call a friend and say, oh my gosh, I was driving down this highway and I saw this pink elephant, or a stampede of them. So it's odd that you wouldn't say something, it doesn't make sense. So I think, so it's important to name the thing and really set the conversation up of, just allowing that to be in the room. I think it's really important, and doing it in a way that's respectful. That's where you build psychological safety. I think there's a borderline. Leaders aren't going to get it right, and it's just like, for me, when I think of teaching a yoga class, I can go in with this perfectly scripted class, yet the environment is completely different. Right. So it is being that thermostat and really knowing when, just being okay not getting it right. And that is the humility. Like, that's the confident humility, I think, of leaders too, is knowing you have the confidence to have this conversation and to be the thermostat where it needs to go and really set the temperature and regulate the environment of that. But at the same time, you don't need to know. Like, that is like needing to get it right, needing it to be perfect. I think that is ego, and ego is driven so much, in leadership. And really what we want is human-centric leadership, where the best thing to say is like, I don't know. And I can assure you of this, right? I can assure you of this, that our work matters, that it's aligned to this. You reaffirm like your objectives, your mission, what like the goals and priorities of the team, and really like temper that, and really give positive reward to it. But needing to know the answer, I think, can be a detriment for not saying anything at all.
Yeah. Yes. And when I have given any amount of advice or counsel for leaders who are in a position like that, it's always been, well, if you're not sure what to say, maybe that's what you say, right? When someone says something that maybe felt uncomfortable to you as a team and as the leader, and not knowing what to say in the meeting at that moment. Because to take a quick step back, right? This makes me think of there's a change management model that we call the SARA model: shock, anger, rejection, acceptance, right? And the idea is that, everybody goes through this change curve when things change, or you may even go through the change curve, so to speak, when you're given tough feedback. Everybody, the person laid off, the person not laid off, the leader who had to do the layoff, right, are going through this change curve of shock, anger, rejection, acceptance. They might go through it in 2 minutes, 2 weeks, 2 years. They might go through it silently. They might go through it, out loud, right? And so recognizing that, it's a natural phenomenon that people kind of go through. And so if you're in a meeting, how's everybody doing? And something is said that you're not sure exactly how to respond to it. My advice and counsel to folks throughout the years has just been, well, say that. Like, I'm not sure how to respond to that, but I do know that this is a very hard, this is a really hard time. It's going to be hard on a lot of us. What was just shared sounds really hard, right? Like, that's all you really need to say, and I think that's part of, helping people feel heard and seen, is letting people say out loud on the team, like, this sucks, right? our close team member is no longer here. I'm worried about them. I'm worried about me. I'm worried about, future layoffs, so to speak. And you don't have to have an answer to that. But you have the choice of whether or not you give any space to that in meetings at all. And probably the leaders who open up that conversation, even imperfectly and even without knowing exactly how to respond, probably drive a bit more sort of belonging, so to speak, than the leaders who are trying to, just put their heads down and white knuckle it and move forward without acknowledging it at all.
Yeah. 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 Because like what you're so right. Where I think of it is like layoffs really shake the humanity or shake the structure. And what you're saying is it doesn't have to shake the humanity. Like at the end of the day, there's a humanity. And although leaders are leaders, they're leading teams and they're leading organization, there's an element of humanity. And that's where I've really shifted my language and who I am as a leader is a holistic, human centric leader. And, like when I think of, we've heard different models like inclusive leader and all of that. And that just started to seem like kitschy and just like a catchphrase. But when I really think about holistic and human-centric leadership, just like organizations put the customer at the center of their business model, it forces me to pause and put the human being at the center of how I'm leading, how I'm communicating, and really like expressing real emotion in a way that is respectful and still like an executive, like a leader. It was at the time of the organization that you and I were at during COVID. And I remember the CEO at the time, like doing an incredible job of, there were two things happening that were really tense at once that caught, the organization was in the wind fires of both. And then just being able to say, I don't know if I'm getting it right, but I'm going to do my best to try my hardest. Yeah. And I just remember, wow, exactly like you said, like, I don't need to get it right. I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but I'm going to do my darndest to try to get it right. And Brene Brown says that too. We don't have to do it right, but it's our job to like work to get it right. And the only way that we get it right is putting ourselves on the court. Is like really testing that with employees. And that's what I feel employees really want when they feel valued. Otherwise, it feels like these buzzwords that we're just throwing in value statements and culture statements, but we're not really getting to the heart of it.
Yeah. Well, so I want to turn our attention briefly, because I'm watching the time here, to those who were laid off, right? And I think now, while we're usually talking to leaders and about the teams that currently report to them, and there are usually probably some pretty hard and fast rules for leaders who just had to lay someone off about whether or not and how they can be in contact with the person who was just laid off. But I want to talk about that person for a moment too, which is, the day before you had a job and worked for a company, you had a place to either virtually log in or physically go to for work. And at least in the US, I would say over the last few decades, a lot of where we get community is at work, right? I think certainly people have other places where they get community, but I would say en masse, right? As a broad generalization, the bulk of people get their community from work, right? And I think even COVID kind of highlighted for us the importance of community, time with people you enjoy, time with friends, things like that. But you were laid off, and now this big part of your life, right? What is it? Probably like 40% or more of your waking hours, that when you're not asleep are spent at work. And then someone may or may not correct me on the math there, but it's somewhere, it's a big chunk.
Yeah.
Right. And now, and it's like, it's like a flip of a light switch. One day it's there, the next day it's not. And there's a lot going on for someone who's going through that. And I'd say one thing that I wanted to talk a bit about today on this topic is what's, the role that those of us who maybe were colleagues, maybe we were colleagues very recently at the place where you were laid off, or maybe it was a couple of companies ago, of the role that we can play, the opportunity that everybody has to play in helping provide a sense of sort of community, belonging to people who were just laid off, right?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you don't know, but I would say we're in this moment of like layoffs are so pervasive at the moment that I would say I'm seeing more LinkedIn posts than ever of people, saying, they were invited to leave their company and are now on the market.
Yeah. I love that invitation to leave your company. I love that part of it because honestly, I feel so incredibly grateful and blessed to have such a great community you included in that. Where one, it's like, what can I do? Who can I reach out to? And even though we may not be a leader in an organization, we're all leaders in our lives. And, it's when there's natural disasters and things that happen, like, what do people do? They just like come together. They just drop out of hat. And I think that same thing, part of me was like, oh my gosh, I haven't talked to this person in years. And so here I am reaching out, and it's like, no, they want to help. They want to, they want to support. And it's such a learning for me on who am I during that time when I see that? Because like, I look at it as a giver and a taker, and like the giver that is an act of kindness and belonging. They want a person, they know what it feels like. Right. And so reaching out, extending networks and doing that because, I've worked in talent acquisition and I've seen both sides of it. It can be like a black hole when you're out there trying to like find the right thing, but people willing to take a call, review your resume, and explain what's happening in the marketplace. That is the biggest transition of confidence sustainment that I think we can give people. Yeah. Because, I was talking with somebody, I was teaching a class, a yoga class, and it was after I was laid off, and I found out that they were. And I just went over and I asked, like, how are you doing? And I just asked them, and they're like, I feel really embarrassed. I'm taking it personally. And I just feel alone in it. And I was like, well, you're not alone, because I did too. And there's so many other people around, and, there was like a little bit of levity in the moment. And afterwards, I found out that individual, they were like, wow, they shared with somebody. I just felt so seen, and it gave me the confidence to go on LinkedIn and start reaching out to people. Yeah. And that one little spark, that one conversation to ask someone how they're doing, is, my motto in life is like, just show up. Like, you show up with a text, with a phone call, with a connection, and you do that for people, and you're able to maintain, like, where a person could dip down into that low confidence, like, this is happening to me. You're able to remind them who they are, and remind them of their gifts that they bring, and like empowering them to know, like, this is not over. Your book is not done. Like, the book's not done. You're just writing a new chapter. Right. Yeah. And I think we take those leadership skills away from like leading teams to our personal networks and our personal contacts too. Just like whatever you practice on the mat is happening off the mat. Like whatever we are practicing in leadership in an organization where we're getting paid, we also do that in our private lives too.
I've never heard that yoga quote before, and I love that. I'm assuming perhaps it's a wrestling quote, but I think it's a yoga quote.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I make it a pretty regular practice when I know someone's been laid off, when I see someone who I know that's posted something online, to reach out and, and just say, hey, that sucks, been there. There's not, but if there is anything I can do, let me know. Would love, if you want to chat, would love to chat. Right. And I saw someone I know who's recently been laid off who, had a pretty upbeat post about it, but he actually, the selfless person he sort of took the platform opportunity to say, hey, like, reach out to those people that have been laid off, because you never know reminding, even if it's 2 companies ago that you worked with them, like reminding them that you remember who they are, their work mattered, had an impact on you enough to reach out and just check in, can make the difference during what can be a pretty isolating time.
I love that, because I just had a colleague of mine, from the organization that I just left. And and this is a part too, we talk so much about recognition in organizations, and there's a lot of recognition systems that you could give. And she said, you know what? I didn't give you your flowers enough. Like, I want to give you your flowers. Right. And I didn't expect that. And what she said was so, it still touches me to this day. And it just happened 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, yeah, let's give people our flowers, their flowers, on who they were, and the value and impact that they had on us. Because I think when uncertainty happens like this, you as the individual also has to be the leader of self, right? So there's what the leaders can do for the employees, but then who are you as a leader of self in order to continue to move forward? So that lead of self is like going back and remembering, like reading those notes, looking at the impact that you've made, and really saying, okay, what is this here to show me? That maybe I was sitting in my comfort zone for so long and it's time for me to grow. I never really thought about it. My story of being laid off, like, okay, yeah, I am an expert and specialize in DEI. But yet when I lensed out, I'm like, no, I am also a solution focused, like scaling strategy and programs. And that is very widespread, And so sometimes we're in a tunnel, like ourselves, and then leading ourselves is saying, okay, what is this here for? And for me, within a short 2 weeks, it helped me reshape my, script of who I am as a leader. And I'm also like an engineer and an architect of people. I would have never thought I would have said that, but maybe it was like the industries that I was in with like engineers. Like, I'm not the engineer to put something together. Do not ask me to put something together. It will fall apart. But I will, like, meaning like that you had to like drive or utilize as a tool. But I am an architect when it comes to sustainable programs and teams that will really impact the culture of an organization. Yeah. And I would have never thought of that, had happened,
good
and
zoom out, right? That really kind of pulled out of your day to day. Well, looking at the time, I'm sorry, I'm going to move us. I'm going to give us sort of a violent shove into our advice column here. So, Ericka, what's one piece of advice you have for leaders out there? What's one thing that they can do today?
I think it's reground people in their purpose. Reground people in the purpose of the organization. Restate the mission. I think there's a lot of noise that's out there, and getting back to the basics of the mission, the direction we're going. It's end of year, so that's always a really good time to do the reflection of what we've accomplished at the end of the year and where we're going. So it's a really, really great time to restate the mission, clarify priorities, and then really have that moment where, it's a call, or it's like a team building where you're really giving deep compliments compliments and sharing the contributions of each person on the team and the work that they're going to contribute go forward. And I think just building intentional time out for that is really, really important. Like the business will be there. It will still keep happening. But as a leader, like pause, slow down, reground people and their why and their purpose. And yeah.
Nice. And so what's your advice for, I'm trying to get better at how I ask this, for senior leaders or even HR partners? What's your advice for them on how to better support leaders?
I think it's really asking leaders like how are their teams doing, because you're kind of like removed and wanting to hear some of those verbatims and listening and hearing that. And then bringing that into culture and honestly seeing it happen in action. I think that if we want to see people shift and change, like leaders need to be able to demonstrate that, but they need to also there's a willingness to also hear the hard feedback, which might be that our employees are scared and our employees are fearful and our employees don't believe X, Y, and Z. And it's hearing that hard feedback or whatever feedback it is in order to support the leaders.
Yeah. Well, and I would add a second thing to that, which is the brilliance of where we overcomplicate accountability at times, and simply a senior leader asking their leadership team, how are your teams doing, might actually be the prompting that a couple leaders around that table might need to actually go ask that question.
Yeah.
On top of all the information you might get, right, coming out of that. Well, Ericka, I hear a puppy in the background getting squirrely and telling us it's time to wrap it up. So this was great. And I feel like I'll have to have you back on another topic in the near future here. But thank you very much for
talk about belonging. The puppy's like, I need attention, right? So give me attention. Yeah, I'm bored.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to do it again.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
All right. See ya.
See ya.